Bristol Schools Forum, and I think we'll just go straight into business today. So you should have had an agenda pack, and then there was a revised paper which I think related to the National Funding Forum, which is item 6 on the agenda. So hopefully you've all got that. We have, okay, Sue's joined us, Sukum's joined us as well. Norman, you're looking after us this afternoon, so welcome.
I am, yeah.
I think the first action of business is election of chair.
That's correct.
So,
can I have a nomination, please?
I haven't asked you this, Steve, but I will nominate you.
Yes, I'd be delighted to continue, Simon.
Okay, a seconder. Everyone agreed? Okay, thank you, everyone. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. I haven't actually got any apologies for absence myself. Norman, have you got any?
I've got a few, yes. I've got apologies from Cameron Shaw, Nicole Dayton, Alistair Brown, Mandy Cheshire, Lauren Gaskell and Mary Cox, and also Sarah Lovell has gone on maternity leave, so she sent apologies.
Okay, all right. Right, I think even with that number, we're still quorum. Yeah. Have we got any new members or resignations?
Not that I'm aware of, Chair, no.
No, I don't know. I don't see anybody, and I'm not aware of anybody. Right. Any vacancies? Anything to say on that? Have you got any notice of that, Norman?
Oh, sorry, I didn't catch that.
So any vacancies, or is that unchanged as from the last meeting?
Yeah, as far as I know, it's still unchanged. Yeah,
Okay.
Nothing told of any new ones.
All right. Okay. Thank you. And anybody got any new declarations of interest? No. Okay. Thank you. All right. So we will go on to the minutes of the last meeting. Initially, any comments on statements of fact? Okay, that's fine. For me, there was only one thing about the self-assessment survey, but it's on the agenda later, so I'll come back to that. All right, okay, so help me here. I'm going to look at actions. There's an action finance team to provide a more detailed update on the growth fund. I think that's on the agenda, so we'll pick that up, right. Steve.
That's on the agenda. Item 5. Yep.
Okay. The SEND transformation update to be brought back to forum after it's been presented to the Children and Young People Committee. I think that intention was that was going to be done not at every forum, but periodically.
I think the action's complete in that we did that at the last meeting, and we'll bring a further update when it next goes to committee.
Okay, thank you. And there was we'll deal with self-assessment in a minute. Any other minutes or anything that I've missed there? Okay. All right. Okay, Christine, I've just seen your note about Eileen from the maps, so we will make sure that that's Yeah, we noted that last time. And so I'm assuming that's going to go in the vacancies. I need to check with Lauren offline on that it is in there. Thank you. Okay. Right. Stephen, I think over to you with for dedicated schools grant, and maybe you can start off by explaining what's the situation with changes and reporting.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So you may have seen from the papers that the Dedicated Schools Grant Budget Monitor, which we're reporting for Q1. I'm sorry, there's some background noise. Don't know if it's me echoing.
No, I think
No.
it's gone on mute. You're good.
Okay. So basically, the council has changed its reporting cycle to a quarterly basis for this financial year. Now, we'd already set the schools forum meetings for this year in line with the reporting schedule that was on a monthly basis in the previous year. So that's just took us out of sync in terms of when we can bring the published financial information to schools forum. So the paper you've got in the pack today is listed as Q1, but it's actually up until the end of May, period 2, which was reported to you in the July meeting. So we're out of sync. We did consider through the chair deferring this meeting, but there was little notice, unfortunately, on this occasion. So just need to basically make you aware that the financial information we bring to forum, because it's in the public domain, has to be in the public domain through the council committee cycle first. So we're unfortunately not able to bring you the current period 5 position because that hasn't been published and won't be for at least another week. So the information you've already seen. There's no changes to that current position on the forecast. That's detailed in the paper, but I just wanted to make you aware of the reason why you've seen that information again.
Steve, do you want to go on to sort of proposals for the future and then take any questions about why and implications?
Okay, so the proposals for the future, just to make sure we can align the schools forum meetings to bring you the latest financial information, will mean that we need to look at reconfiguring dates. Now, we can't effectively do that for November, so we'll bring the period 5 budget monitoring cycle to you in November. The reason we can't change the November meeting is it's already too late within the month, and we need to have that schools forum meeting to comply with the initial decisions and recommendations in respect to information we need to submit to the Department for Education on pupil place planning, and if we need to consider a disapplication request. So we can't change the November date. The next date then, the key date, is the January 2026 meeting, which is currently scheduled for the 14th of January. Now, I'd like to propose to yourselves that we defer that meeting for 1 week up until the 21st of January. And there's other reasons for this suggestion as well. One being so we can bring you the very latest financial information at that point, which will have gone to committee. We also need potentially another week to develop the school funding recommendations and proposals for schools forum to make your recommendations. If we backtrack from the 14th of January, it would mean that the Schools Forum Finance subgroup would have to meet the week commencing the 29th of December to be able to prepare the papers to publish to you on the 7th of January. So by deferring to the 21st, we then got to prepare papers by the 14th, and the Schools Forum Finance Subcommittee can meet the week commencing the 5th of January. It does allow us that extra week of being able to, colleagues to work over the Christmas period to decipher the school funding information that we won't expect to receive until the 15th of December. That's the date at the moment. So I think that date, if everybody's in agreement, we look to change to the 21st to allow us all that consideration, as much time as possible, in a very restricted timeline, given the DFE announcements, the school funding settlement, the autumn budget announcements, we're not going to get until late November. So I think if everybody's in agreement, we can look to change that date. So those are the reasons why, and I know it's frustrating that we're having to reconfigure, but I think it is in the best interest to allow us that time and to give you the most up-to-date information at every period that you meet.
So over to the forum for any comments or observations. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, Louise says fine by me. All right, okay. I think, yeah, a little bit. Yeah, Lee, Nick, all good, fine. Just
Okay.
so just as a sort of record, understanding that what's the rationale for going to the different reporting cycle? What was that for?
Just bear with me a sec. So in terms of the response from the Deputy Section 151 officer, it was just to change the formal reporting periods to the committees through the strategy and resources committees to move to a quarterly basis. And then just have exception periods within those areas. So I think it was just to streamline the reporting cycle for the council. It is unfortunate that we'd already scheduled the year's dates of schools forum in advance, and then the quarterly reporting has caught us a little bit off guard for schools forum. But I think it has streamlined the reporting cycle internally for the council and for committee, and that we've got key reporting periods for quarter one, quarter two, which aligns with the deficit management plan reporting to this Department for Education as well. So there's various aspects to it, but I think it was obviously an internal decision to change to quarterly.
Okay. All right. Okay, thanks. So Simon, so it sounds like we need, not Simon, Stephen. We're going to go with that the 21st. Assume at the same time, which will be 5 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
And Norman, either yourself or Lauren, can you need to resend the invite to change it from the 14th of January to the 21st, please?
Yeah, I'll let everyone know that it's been changed. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen, looking forward to the end of the academic year and subsequent forum meetings, do you anticipate it would be prudent to change any future dates to get good reporting, or
I think we've covered the key dates for this period so that we can consider the 2026-27 funding aspects. I do think we need to consider the dates going forward for next year. But if I liaise with Democratic Services and then look to, and with yourself, Steve, and Simon around the key dates, and if we need to change any that are already scheduled, we do that. I haven't gone beyond January at this moment in time because I just needed to focus on this 26-27 funding cycle.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Stephen. Oh, okay. So, bit of protocol for us all. Tom has reminded us this is a public meeting. Please use the chat only for Zoom technical issues. Who knew? Okay, all right. There we go. Right. Is there anything else to say on the schools grant budget monitor? Any subsequent questions, given we've already seen it previously? Okay, thank you. Right, then we had a question from last time about the use of the growth fund, and I think one of the things associated with it was the growth fund was underspent, and we also periodically as a forum should be notified what it's been spent on. So I think in page 15 of the pack there's a table, and Stephen, is it you to talk to this?
It is, yes. There's not much to say really. I think the question was around any details on the growth fund, how we're actually currently utilising it. So the schools and the table you can see on page 15 of the pack just show the current commitments for the growth fund. What I can say is that I'm aware of 2 applications that are being considered at the moment from 2 maintained primary schools, but I've not listed them because I don't know what the details are. They've not submitted their applications yet. Whether they'll be successful or not, I'm not sure. So it wasn't appropriate to name those schools. But as you can see there, we've got the ongoing commitment for the schools that have been previously agreed for growth that are moving through the year. Those bulge classes, growth classes are moving through the year groups. And so you can see there the commitment for the April to August 2025 growth, and then through to the end of the financial year. So that's the commitment for this financial year. In terms of the question regarding the underspend on growth in previous years, you'll recall we previously used to retain £2 million for growth. And I proposed to Schools Forum last year that we didn't need to retain that level of funding, and that we wanted to maximise the funding through the formula to the schools. So we reduced that retention to £1 million. And then obviously that is clearly committed in full for this year at this moment in time. So the benefit there of not retaining it is that all schools receive more through the formula. And I think we're managing the growth quite well within the commitment we've got this year. Obviously, if the other applications go through, then we might be spending a little bit more on growth than we've retained. But that's fine in my opinion.
Okay, I'm going to go to Melanie because I know you raised the question, and then I'm going to go to Merch.
Yeah, so the question was just, I think, and it was in the minutes that we were going to come back with more clarity on the growth fund, which I appreciate you have addressed there, Steve. So it was just that it looked like we had a schools block underspend of 3 million. And it was also the question of whether that could be used to support primaries and secondaries who have a deficit. Mm-hmm. And whether it could be used for specific things. I think one of the things that was raised in the previous meeting was around if there were any redundancy costs, for example.
Okay, so Chair, we've issued the response to that question in terms of the underspend. I wasn't aware in the previous meeting still wasn't here in the previous years of why we were showing the 3 million underspend. Basically, it is predominantly due to growth that's been underspent in previous years. As I've said, we've reduced that now. We've allocated the funding out to schools through the formula. There was a closing school, St Barnabas, which contributed to that in-year underspend last year. So that was part of the reason for that. I mean, essentially, as I've said in the response, the local authority records the in-year movements for each block for our own internal purposes, so we can see exactly what's happening within each area. The DFE, on the other hand, don't acknowledge the separate movements, the separate recording of the DSG blocks, and look at the bottom line total in isolation. So when we've reported our 2024-25 accounts to the Department for Education, we've just shown one bottom line DSG deficit. So there's no surplus that the DFE are aware of. In terms of reallocating it to schools, we can't do that through the formula. The formula is set at the start of each year, so every individual school gets their share of the national funding formula, and how Bristol applies that through the funding formula mechanism. There's nothing else that can be applied to schools in deficit through that formula route. We have to comply with the national funding formula and operational guidance in that respect. It's exactly the same position for maintained nursery schools and special schools who don't get any recognition of deficits through their early years block or the high needs block. But in terms of supporting schools in deficit, obviously the commitment's there to work with all the schools to look to support schools how we can. We do have, our previous year, we did have the Schools in Financial Difficulty grant. That was a one-off grant from the DFE. That's not available now. So obviously we just need to work with every school, looking at its own circumstances. In terms of supporting the cost of redundancies, again, that isn't applied to any schools, because schools, when we're looking at the multiple year financial planning, always demonstrate a saving from the reductions in staff as a, through those redundancies. Even when you've met the redundancy payments in the first year, you will make a saving in the full year effect from the second year. So that isn't anything that we take direct funding to support. So everything's in the response that's been circulated by Norman, but happy to take any other questions if there are any on that. You're on mute, Steve.
I'm mute. Sorry. I was just checking. Melanie, you're okay? And if you were, I'm going to go over to Merch.
Mine's just a question on the report. I understand that you get your growth formula as the classes go through, but you've got 2 schools which seem to be finishing at year 7, and I just was interested to know why that's not going forward.
As from the notes in the system, they were just one-off increases for those particular years, and there's been no evidence to support the ongoing growth moving through the years. So it is an area we do look at those schools, and we check with the school admissions team to see if the numbers there and are continuing through, but they weren't on those 2 schools.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Louise?
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions, if that's okay. Firstly, thank you very much for providing the information and for the response to Melanie's question. That was really helpful to see. A few questions though. Do you have a growth policy? And apologies, I'm fairly new to the Bristol Schools Forum. Do you have a growth policy? And if so, 1, can I see it? And 2, when was it last reviewed by the Schools Forum?
We do have a growth policy. I can't say when it was last reviewed by Schools Forum. I know it's not changed and been updated since about 2019. So it's been quite a long-standing policy which has been applied and has worked. So it's been obviously reviewed internally, but no changes have been made to the policy for quite some time. But I'm quite happy to share that and share it to all members here, so you can see that. But I don't know if it's pre-me 2019 if it ever came to forum for your review.
Okay, well that'd be great to share it, and perhaps if there are some questions from forum members, we might want to request it to come to the forum for consideration. And at what point will the forum get an opportunity to comment on the proposed scale of the growth budget for 26-27?
That'll be part of the consultation that I've referred to in the next item. So that's something that will come in the November and the January meetings.
Okay, thank you. And then my final one, sorry to be a pain, was about the response that you gave to Melanie's question about the DSG all being put together when it comes to the DFE. I just wanted to raise that I am querying that with the DFE, not from a Bristol perspective, just from a more procedural perspective, because schools forums have to go through a process and schools have to be consulted on what percentage of the schools block can be moved to the high needs block. And that feels like a bit of a loophole, really, that schools forums could put lots of money into the growth fund that then gets underspent, and that could effectively mean a greater transfer from the schools block to the high needs block than was agreed and consulted on. So that feels like a bit of a loophole that the DFE, I'm keen to hear what they say about that loophole, so I'll feedback when I get something back from them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mute again. Thank you, Louise and Councillor Christine.
Thank you. Did I hear correctly, Steve? Did you say that you have 2 primary school applications for Growth Fund?
There's 2 that I've been made aware of, but they haven't submitted the applications yet. They've expressed an interest. We've shared the policy with them, and they're looking to submit an application, but nothing has arrived yet.
Okay, maybe that's something I take up offline.
Okay.
Well.
Oh, okay. Any more questions on that? Thank you. That was very helpful. I think we're going to go now onto item 6, which is the national funding formula. And if I have it right, there was a revised version of the paper that went out in which we were all elevated to councillors, which we don't actually have that promotion, but we understand what's going on there. So Stephen, I guess you're going to take us through this pack, item 6 now.
I am, yeah. Hopefully you can see the screen just to make for ease. And this is the revised paper that was circulated yesterday and today to those that didn't get it because of the technical issues with our internet. Essentially, I've updated the paper due to information obtained at the end of last week. And I'll come on to that, and it's just purely focusing around the grant transfers. So in terms of the direction of travel, what we know already for 26-27.
Stephen, I don't know how big people's screens are, but is there any way you can make the thing a bit bigger?
Yep.
Lovely, thank you.
Does that help? Okay. So basically for this paper, we're asking you to note the national funding formula and schools funding update. Consider the formula consultation. So as Louise has just mentioned, that will include growth. To note the 26-27 school funding timeline, and to agree the Schools Forum Finance Subcommittee membership, and I've got some proposed dates as well for that. In terms of background, you all know it, you've all seen the paper, you know where we're heading to in terms of the direction of travel for the national funding formula. At this moment in time, we know in section 3.2.1 that we do have to move at least another 10% closer to the national funding formula factor values where we're not currently mirroring, which mirroring means where you either plus 2.5% or minus 2.5% away from the DFE national funding formula values. So we are not there in quite a lot of factors where historically Bristol Schools Forum and the local authority have supported the deprivation factors. So we fund more on the deprivation factors than the national funding formula values quoted by the DFE. We're still waiting for the DFE to decide if they will ever implement what I would call the hard national funding formula or the full national funding formula. Well, they will determine the rates that we apply to all our schools, and then we'll have transitional protections and so on operating for years where schools have seen any adverse impact from, example, moving from the deprivation factors we've currently got to the DFE levels. In terms of the funding formula, we've still got the remit through the local authority to consult with Schools Forum, to take Schools Forum recommendations, and then full council approves the schools funding formula value as it has done in previous years. We will have the minimum funding guarantee protection. At the moment, that's set between 0% and minus 0.5%. That may change when we get the school funding announcements in November, December. So we'll keep that one on subject to update. What we know already, section 4.3, is that the early years retention rate is reducing to 3%, which is positive for all of our early years providers, whether they're private, voluntary independent sector, maintained nursery classes, maintained nursery schools, or childminders. So they will then see at least 97% of the early years funding being directed directly to them through the early years funding formula. So like I say, that's a positive move. So that's definitely happening. If you recall, that moved from 5% to 4% for the current year, and then it's moving to 3% retention from 26-27. High needs funding, we've not had any confirmed updates, but we are expecting some big announcements on high needs. The indications from all the conversations with the government is that they do need to recognise the high needs spend. A particular aspect of the formula is called the historical aspect, and that's not been updated since 2017-18. And obviously we were all spending significantly different than we were in all them years ago. So that's one area particular to watch. Early years, other than the change to 3% retention, I'm not expecting any major changes to early years funding. We've gone through at least 3 years of funding reforms for early years with changes in entitlements and eligibility. So we've had some more changes in year this year from September. I'm not expecting any more changes next year from September 26. I'm hoping to get some stability now on the early years block. But again, that's subject to any announcements that come through in November and December. Central School Services block, there will be a further 20% reduction to the historical factors there, which basically is imposed by the Department for Education and is intended to remove historical allocations where local authorities have retained money and not allocated it through the schools funding formula. So when this block reduces, essentially that funding is then directed through the other DSG blocks and hopefully gets through to the schools funding formula, so schools benefit from that. De-delegation subject to consultation, which I'm going to issue in October, as early as possible in October, by the way. So we'll look to consider, as you have to on an annual basis, exactly what we de-delegate from the maintained schools. So this doesn't affect any academies. And you can see there on the table what we agreed to de-delegate last year. So all of them are subject to consideration again this year. One that isn't on the table there is schools in financial difficulty. We've got previously had de-delegation to create a fund to support schools in financial difficulty. It helps with additional HR costs if you're going through management of change. So we'll put that one back on for consultation. We didn't do it last year, but we'll put some details on for that for this year. Whether it gets approved or not is subject to the consultation and schools forum consideration. In terms of the transfer of grants, you'll recall from recent years, whenever there's been an in-year grant for teachers' pay and pensions increases, the new national insurance grant, the year after, those grants get subsumed into the formula and are allocated through the per pupil funding or through, for special schools, they still get a separate grant. For early years, it gets added to the hourly rates. So that transition from the current national insurance grants will move into the formula from April 2026. The reason I updated this particular section is because we had the previous rates of the grants from 2025-26 and have subsequently found the funding rates that will transfer through the formula for 2026-27. So you can see there the amounts per pupil that will be added to the funding formula. This doesn't include any other potential funding increases or changes that may come following the budget announcements. This is purely in respect to the transfer of the national insurance and the school budget support grants. And what the DFE will also do is increase the per pupil protections. So every school will see at least a minimum £93 for primary schools increase for the national insurance grant, £159 in total to the minimum per pupil funding levels. That's the minimum amount any school can receive through the funding formula. The timeline I've quoted there is in line with the DFE timelines. So we do need to consult with schools on de-delegation, on growth, on funding principles, moving towards the national funding formula. How quickly do we move? Do we stick with the DFE 10% closer, or do we go to the full national funding formula values? And then we'd have to work with the schools funding subgroup to work through the implications of that and see if there's any adverse impacts on schools that we want to manage and mitigate by looking at different scenarios. So that'll come out for consultation in October. We've got the schools forum and disapplication requests, as I've mentioned previously. Schools forum subgroup, we need to meet. I would suggest the week commencing, I wrote it down before, the 10th of November. So we need to convene a date with the finance subgroup for that to allow consideration to the consultation responses, to the formula funding scenarios that will then be brought to the schools forum for consideration on the 25th of November. December, we should get the DSG allocations. The current date of publication is the 15th of December. That may change. It's all got to follow the autumn budget announcements, which will be towards the end of November. And we've been told 15th of December is when the DSG allocations should arrive. And then we've got January, which is the key decision making, recommendation making meeting for schools forum. Again, backtracking from that, we do need to fit in a finance subgroup meeting to work through all the details we will have considered over Christmas, following the publication on the 15th of December, looking at the final scenarios, looking at the best options for all schools to bring to Schools Forum on the 21st of January, it is now, for consideration and recommendations to go forward for the schools funding submission, which will also be on the 21st of January. We've got February, statutory deadline in February, the last day in February to issue school budgets. So all those will come out. We do look forward to a leap year because we get an extra day in February to do that. And then in March, the DFE will confirm the GAG allocations, general annual grant allocations to academies. So that's the timeline there. And I'll stop there. We've got the recommendations from Schools Forum to consider, as I've said, around the notes in the update, considerations, consultation aspects, and the timeline and Schools Forum subgroup membership, which is the next item 6A.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Before we go on to those, let's just have a little bit of debate. I'm going to go with Simon, and then Murch, and then Melanie.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Steve, as well. Thank you for that table, just reminding us of the various rates. Just trying to remember why, when you look at what is being rolled into the 26-27 NFF, when you look at the school budget support grant, the rates that get rolled in are around about 90% of the funding for 25-26, and I'm trying to understand the rationale. I mean, it's not you that set it, I know that, but I didn't know whether you knew. And likewise with the national insurance, it's not the same 10% reduction, but it is 1 or 2%. They've sort of almost like rounded down by a couple of pounds. I didn't know whether you knew of the rationale, because if the school support grant was there to help us with our increased costs, they obviously don't go away, and obviously anything that goes on top of that, it doesn't disappear just because we may have a lower pay increase next year.
When we've looked at this previously, the difference in the figures is because those grant transfers include support staff as well as teaching staff, and so the calculations behind the scenes include the full 12 months which have been applied for support staff, and then you've got a 5/12, 7/12 mix for the teaching staff elements behind the calculations. I know we did a breakdown in the previous year when the grants transferred, and we couldn't quite calculate why there was some percentages different, and it was all to do with that mix of 12 months funding is already included for support staff, and then you've got the full year effect of the teaching staff element only.
Okay, thank you. I'll have to get my head around that one, I think. Thank you, though.
Okay. Mitch?
Yeah, I mean, I find this a bit difficult because we're starting off with trying to cover cost increases on teachers, and the way we're going to do that is then to build it in, on a cost per pupil basis, which we're then going to apply a funding formula to. So is there any way to reflect better the actual costs per school?
Unfortunately not. The grants we receive are based on the national formula and are done on a per pupil basis, and we do have winners and losers. We've got individual schools with higher cost staffing where they've got teaching staff all at UPS scales and so on, who notoriously don't receive as much grant as they need to cover the increased cost. There's absolutely nothing we can do to influence that national allocation and the formula that the DFE use. They use that average for every local authority. They don't even differentiate between authorities. It's just that's the rate that you get.
But in a world where we've got increasing pressures, that's going to make some schools suffer, quite significantly, isn't it?
It is, unfortunately, yes. And then the onus then will be on the individual schools to try to manage that as best they can. It is extremely difficult if the school is popular, they've got no turnover in staff, and they've got the all the staff at the higher end of the scale, they will always struggle.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Well, it's an answer, Merch. Melanie.
Yes, I just wanted to really kind of raise awareness again of the consultation process, because obviously last year we did have sort of quite a few sticking points on the consultation process for the maintained schools, mainly because of the lack of response to the consultation, and then having quite a few mixed very split responses on several of the items for dedelegation. So it's really just a reminder to everyone, and particularly those who are maintained primary and have maintained primary colleagues, because of the number of maintained primaries compared to secondaries, to just really encourage their colleagues via the head teachers and the business managers to respond to the consultation, so that there kind of is a good volume of responses to work with, because I remember last year it was very difficult, and we ended up having to defer some decisions to later meetings.
Melanie, can I just build on that? But I'm struggling to remember exactly where we landed, which was we felt that the consultation could be improved, or it would have been good to get more people involved, but I can't remember if there was a specific action or plea.
I think the action, and Lee and Merch might remember this, because we ended up having to have sort of further meetings outside of Schools Forum. I think the action really was, yes, to try and encourage more of the maintained primary schools to respond to the consultation, because it was very difficult when we were dealing with, for example, 9 responses and a split vote of 4 to 5. And it felt like a huge amount of responsibility for the, at the time, 3 maintained representatives who were, on the forum and in the room, effectively, making the decision on that vote. So really just to get out as many comms, I suppose, as possible, via as many means as possible, to the heads and to the business managers, and encouraging people to respond. I mean, often the documentation by nature of the document itself is quite lengthy, and I think, maybe people just get a little bit put off by that.
Okay. And Lee, you've raised your hands as well. Was that?
Yeah, it's just to come in on that actually. So completely agree. It'd be really good to see consultation take a slightly different shape this year. Me, Merch, and Melanie last year found it quite challenging. I think we felt compelled to make a decision because schools didn't have a time to put in place anything else, but we won't be doing the same this year. We did also offer to support, so please, take us up on that offer if you feel it's needed, getting the message out to schools to let them know that is an important decision, and kind of raising the response from 9 to hopefully closer to the 40 or so would be really, really helpful. So yeah, please take us up on that offer of supporting with the consultation. I think as a minimum, it was noted last year that information about a consultation was on the tail end of a bulletin to heads, whereas suggested really it needs to go to heads and business managers and be kind of flagged as something they need to look at. So if you could kind of consider that as a minimum and make sure school business managers are on the distribution list, that would be really, really, really helpful. But please do take us up on the offer of support. Otherwise, it's going to be quite challenging in November if we can't make a decision.
Stephen, are you able to make any comments or observations on that?
Yeah, definitely, totally agree. And I know we considered this last year in terms of how we can maximise the responses. And there's two, just to be clear, there's 2 aspects to the consultation. There's a consultation on the schools funding formula, which is for academies and maintained schools, and then the dedelegation, which is the maintained schools only. We do need the maximum responses for both aspects of the consultation. And I think through me, we'll circulate it to heads, to business managers, chairs of governors, and again, I know through Vic, we'll mention it, the head teachers briefings, and just make sure we've got maximum publicity out there, and then chase people we shouldn't have to keep chasing, but we will do to get the maximum responses, because then that makes it a much better consideration for schools forum if you've got the the meaningful responses behind the consultation.
And have you got what's the sort of dates on that?
I'm hoping to get it out next week, so I'm going to commit to first week in October, get the consultation out, and then we can get it back in time for the first meeting of the schools forum finance subgroup for consideration, and then we may have to go out to consult again on certain aspects once we've got the schools funding announcements at the end of November, December. At this moment, we can consult on principles, but we haven't got the detail, we haven't got the funding aspects. And so they may, as last year, we may have some quite last minute recommendations to consider. But that's out of our control, unfortunately, but we'll just have to do the best we can with the timeline that we've got to work to.
Okay, so it sounds like that subgroup might be quite a good dip test to see how things are going. Right, I'm now going to go over to Louise, and then Danny, and then Nick. So Louise.
Thank you very much. It's a point of process, first of all, really, in terms of the consultation. So would you normally, before you consult with schools, share with the schools forum what you're consulting on?
That's essentially what we're discussing now, but we haven't got the detail. So this is all about the principles. So we'll be consulting on growth, direction of travel to the national funding formula, any minimum funding guarantee, PFI linked to the RPIX and affordability. So all the aspects that we can do, but it's really difficult because normally, as you know, Louise, we used to get all the funding information in July, and we could work through the summer and bring more meaningful consultations with figures and facts out. But we've, unfortunately, the last couple of years, we've not been able to do that. So will you be making recommendations like what percentage we're going to transfer from schools block to the high needs block and what the MFG should be? What are you actually going to be asking for from schools? Well, we'll probably consult on the same basis as the current year, and then if anyone wants to suggest anything different, then we take that to the finance subcommittee and work through those scenarios and just develop scenarios based on consultation responses.
Okay. It's just, as a schools forum member, I don't know that I know what you're going to be consulting on schools with next week.
No, nobody does. So
what are you going to consult on next week?
Everything I've just said in terms of the principles, the growth, it'll all be on the same basis as the previous year in terms of what we know, but subject to change, obviously.
Again.
Yeah, but subject to change once we know the schools funding allocation and the school funding announcements at the end of November and into December. All we can do is do the best we can with the information we've got.
Okay. And can I just, again, it might be from not knowing, the subgroup that you're talking about, you've mentioned their role in relation to the consultations, so that's helpful. But what is their role more generally, and how have you identified who's going to be on it?
We reviewed the membership. It's the next item on the agenda, actually. But
do you want to leave that one then? That's fine.
Okay.
And then the final thing that I had from your paper was you talked in there about disapplications by the 18th of November. Have schools been told anything about that so that they can get information into you in time for the disapplications?
The disapplication, I'm not aware, would impact on individual schools.
I was just thinking about things like if they've got rents and that sort of stuff that they need to apply for a disapplication for.
There isn't any. We went through one last year who tried to go down the exceptional circumstances route because of the circumstances of their school and split site around playing fields. That was the only one last year. I'm not aware of any
across the whole. Okay.
No.
Okay.
I think if I can just add to Steve's response, so to speak, Director of Education at Bristol. Previously, so if you went back kind of 5 or 10 years, there were more things that we could apply the formula to. We could make exceptional requests for, schools in unusual kind of circumstances like split sites and make those cases to a DFE slowly. And Steve, you can probably confirm, but those variables have narrowed to the point of actually just a very few, very small 2 or 3 areas that we can, as they move towards national funding formula, where actually the funding will just be set, and that will be what we get. So what Steve is describing, I think, is not so much what's in our control, but actually what's then in the DFE's control but also the fact that we need to have some discussions as a forum on the principles of the future budget, whilst not knowing, because the DfE haven't set the budget yet, and obviously the autumn statement will be very late this year. It will likely go right up to the wire of, almost Christmas Eve, I think, in terms of when we will get the figures and be able to process that through and see the impact on individual schools, which is why we then meet very early in January. So it's a really tight timetable. Sadly, it's the same almost every year, and my colleagues in finance will end up working quite close to the Christmas break to get that back out for us.
Okay, thank you, Vic. Danny.
I am also new to the forum, so apologies if any of this was addressed in previous meetings. And my question was going to start with when will, but given the two responses that we just had, I imagine the answer might be more complicated. But I was going to ask, when will Bristol be able to share school level scenarios for the straight to NFF option versus a further 10% step, and the different MFG settings within the DfE bounds? So would we be able to kind of see the different implications for the different schools and any scenarios?
I'll defer to Steve, but I think, as I said, we won't get the figures till late November, maybe even early. Is that right, Steve?
Late November for the announcements and 15th of December for the allocations. But in terms of Danny's question there, we will do some modelling, but it's always based on the previous financial year, because we won't have the October census data until December. So we'll do some modelling that the Schools Forum Finance Subcommittee will review early November, and that will show potential impact at individual school level, massively subject to change for pupil numbers once we get the October census, subject to change for the school funding settlement, and the actual quantum of DSG that we've got to allocate. But we'll do the modelling as best we can. But it's always difficult at this time of year because the key funding census isn't until next week, but we don't get the data until much later.
And I get that, and there's a lot of tension and friction in the system, so I'm not trying to be difficult or awkward, and the timeline does feel pressured, but it's really quite challenging to think how the Schools Forum may recommend moving directly to NFF without seeing any kind of modelling or having any actuals. So I appreciate your position, but I think it was worth asking the question anyway. And then just to take it in a slightly different direction, in light of the pressures on the CESSB, and the funding that's outlined here, what's the correlation between this information and the central services, and what services might be thinned or potentially even recharged to schools in the future? Or what does that look like?
In terms of the central school services block, that's minimal in the overall scheme of things. We've got 2.7 million for the central school services block that contributes to the support services, to the statutory functions, so Director of Education being one of them. We have got within there an element of funding which is around 300,000, which is subject to the historical commitments, and that will see a 20% reduction. So there's certain services in there that will have to manage that internally. We won't pass any additional charges on to schools. So again, we just have to make efficiencies where we can through that imposed cut. The rest of the central school services block funds national copyright licensing and contributions to Schools Forum and so on. So it's quite minimal in terms of, like I say, the overall dedicated schools grant, which is over £500 million. In terms of any other aspects that may link to schools, it would only be through the dedelegation, which is subject to consultation, which covers the services that we've shown on the table before. So trade union facilities time, school improvement, free school meals eligibility check in those areas. So that's the only area where we would look to increase anything to schools, but subject to consultation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danny. Nick B.
Hello. Yeah, thank you. I'm a primary school head teacher. I would conjecture that one of the reasons for a lack of responses last year to previous consultations might be that the papers and the questions being asked are actually very difficult to understand. And naturally, we want to respond to consultations from a position of knowledge. So the question is, what can be done to help head teachers understand not only the papers, but to imagine the implications of a decision either way on the questions that are being asked?
Thanks, Nick. I agree with that. I think it's not the easiest thing to just see in black and white on a Word document and then understand what the implications are for your schools, individual schools or sectors. I'm more than happy to attend any head teacher briefings or your governor meetings to go through that. We won't be able to discuss individual school impacts, but we could discuss, the overall implications, of any potential changes.
I mean, it's a good question from Nick. Anybody got any good, bright ideas that might help?
I think the modelling that I was just noting would be particularly helpful. Just some example scenarios that would have a real-term impact on schools in our area. Sorry for jumping in.
Okay. Simon and then Christine.
I mean, just going back to your question, yeah, I mean, I agree. I've been looking at funding models and stuff for over 10 years now, and it's still, it's not easy. I would say that's, schools have business managers, trusts have finance people that, you lean on them. For me, for my trust, I put out a little note to all my head teachers to kind of explain it and saying what I recommend. So I would just encourage people to lean on their sort of business professionals within their school or within their trust to help them out.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor Christine?
I think I agree about how complicated understanding this formula and the implications of various formulas for individual schools. I think head teachers need to understand the basics of what's going on here. But I also want to reiterate that the formula is for the local authority to both propose and decide. There is a responsibility to consult, but Forum doesn't decide what it is. That's for the local authority to be doing that. And so schools are consulted with rather than make a decision.
Okay, thank you. That's clear. And Mitch?
Yeah, I mean, I've obviously only started looking at these things since coming onto the forum, and one of the things that is very clear is how interrelated things are. So if you take a decision on how fast you're moving to the national funding formula, it isn't obvious that the effect that that's going to have because of the weighting that you have on the minimum funding formulas and the way that these can work. And something that tries to explain that sort of interrelationship in a reasonably simple way would be incredibly helpful, because I think sometimes we're taking decisions about deprivation or what have you, which build a big inertia into the system. And when we're talking about moving 10% towards the national funding formula, some of this inertia, I think, and I'm not an expert in this, but some of that inertia that we have with the minimum funding formulas and things like that means that movement towards the national funding formula is going to be very, very slow.
Thank you. I think what I'd like to do now is just talk about the finance subgroup, and might ask Simon, do you just, if I can see him, see on there? I was going to ask Simon to, oh, there, yeah, sorry, I couldn't see on the screen. Simon, are you able to sort of explain historically what that group's done, and then I might just seek some clarity on how we get the members on that group.
Yeah, I mean, it was started quite a few years ago. I think partly for that very reason that it is complicated and it's not always easy to have that kind of discussion about what affects this and what affects that with a group of 15 or 20 in the full schools forum. So the idea of this little group was really for people who maybe are closer to these sort of numbers than maybe head teachers or whatever, to really kind of be able to get to grips with it and really understand the impacts, and kind of just look at all the different models and kind of come to a consensus about what the best model is to recommend to the local authority. Take Christine's point, it is the local authority's decision. So we obviously just a recommendation. And it's a tricky one because, you know, each of us comes slightly conflicted because we may be coming with, you know, the opinions of one school or one trust or whatever. So it is a tricky one, but it is a really useful way of really understanding what the key drivers are. And we try and come up with the consensus that kind of meets the previous aims of, you know, does it benefit the most schools? Does it also give weighting to the disadvantaged? All those things that we know are a priority for the local authority, but you know that is also difficult to do as well. So I think this was the membership from last year, and it's obviously, you know, not a closed shop or anything like that. So I don't know whether Steve, the plan was to ask if those members wanted to continue, but also if anyone else wanted to join it.
Exactly that, Simon. Totally agree with everything you said as well. I think it's a really useful group to whittle down the scenarios based on the consultation responses. There's no way practically we can bring everything to a schools forum meeting. So we need this subgroup to work through the detail and then present the most favourable options for consideration and recommendations at forum. This is last year's group. It was a good group, I'll have to say. Really positive, really challenging, looked at every scenario we could think of. When we presented scenarios that we will develop as a local authority to put forward, we had more scenarios coming back through the subgroup to work on. So everything was considered. And then ultimately, we brought, I think, 3 scenarios to Schools Forum in January for the final recommendations. And that was after that long process of consideration of every single aspect and considering all the schools' consultation responses as well.
Okay, Louise, got a hand up.
Thank you. That's a very helpful explanation. I'd be quite keen to be part of the group, but equally, I don't want to put the representation out of balance or make the group too big. So if you have a vacancy, I'd be keen to support. Thank you.
There isn't a set number or any vacancies, but yeah, I'd welcome you on board, Louise, with all your knowledge. It'll be really good.
Okay, I don't even know whether we agree on our vote on it or whatever, but that seems like a good idea. Anybody who was previously on it has any desire to step back? So in which case, I think you've got Mandy, Melanie, Murch, Simon, Louise. I'm sort of associated. I don't know whether I'm an actual member. And Stephen, and then previously it was Levi. I don't know if Levi's still around, Stephen.
She's on maternity leave, so Andrew's covering for Levi.
Okay. Okay, that sounds like a really good group.
Brilliant, thank you.
Any more on that? We'll go around it again, and we'll go around it again, obviously, and that will be in the in-person meetings as well. In which case, no, we'll go on to number 7, which is entitled School Organisation Strategy Update. Vic, I don't know who's leading on this.
Yep, so we've got Jessica Taylor in my team who will be leading the update. So Jessica's on the line, I think has some slides to share as well. So Jessica, I'm just going to hand straight to you to take us through.
Yep, I'll share my screen. Sorry, it's just going to share back at you for a second. Can you see that?
No. Yes. Yep. Yep.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'll just take us through the school organisation strategy, starting with our need for change. So births in Bristol rose from 6,170 in the academic year 2008-2009 to 6,832 in the academic year 2011-2012. And that was reflected by higher primary school intakes between 2013 and 2016. The birth rate has now receded, and we are seeing a decrease of 27% between 2011-2012 and 22-23. So that's quite a significant decrease in births. This year, 65 out of 98 primary schools in Bristol with admission from reception are undersubscribed, and 33 schools have received offers up to their published admission number. And we have in Bristol 33 schools that are one form entry. So that means they have 30 pupils per form in their reception years. So meaning we have no further room for PAM reductions in these schools. We, as a local authority, do have a statutory duty to ensure we have sufficient school places. So that means that we don't have too many or too few. But we do face limitations in influencing admissions decisions for schools that are outside of our direct control. And currently we have 27 maintained schools where the local authority is the admission authority. So the graph at the top, the blue line represents the original current PAN for our primary schools. The dotted line is the updated PAN in taking into consideration PAN reductions that we've had for the academic year 26-27. And the orange line is the forecast. So you can see there's still a significant gap between the updated PAN and the forecast. We are projecting a surplus number of primary school places of 1,064 to the academic year 2030-2031. The map there just demonstrates how we divide Bristol into our planning areas. So the black lines show the 14 primary planning areas, and the red lines show our secondary planning areas, which are north, east, central, and south. So the draft school organisation strategy 2025 to 2028 considers all needs across all educational phases, early years to post-16, including SEND, and aligns with statutory responsibilities and strategic partnerships. The aim of our strategy is to review school places in light of falling pupil numbers, particularly in primary education, and we're aiming to reduce surplus capacity by at least 50%. There's a continued effort to secure sufficiency in early years provision amid government policy changes, strategic planning to accommodate fluctuating secondary and post-16 demand through capital projects and partnerships, expansion and adjustment of specialist provision to meet the growing demand, and a recognition of the impact of socioeconomic inequality, population mobility, and sanctuary-seeking children on planning decisions. So if we start with early years, Bristol was sufficient for childcare places for all ages on a citywide basis in 2024, but there was less than desired sufficiency for under 2s places, knowing that the expansion of childcare was impending in September 2025. Over 200 places for babies were created for September 25, and further expansion grant funding has been awarded for 25-26 to ensure the demand is met. Our recommendations and next steps, as outlined in our strategy, are to invest capital funding in the expansion of places for under 2s, prioritising the wards with the lowest sufficiency, maximise the hourly base rate as far as practical to ensure good take-up of the offer, incentivise providers to keep places open for eligible 2-year-olds by introducing a higher hourly base rate, and promote expansion in those wards with the lowest sufficiency. Moving on to primary. Current birth rate projections indicate that the next 5 years will continue to see a reduction in the number of reception year children requiring school places. Economic viability of schools remains a priority for us, and school closures must be a last resort. In terms of how we do our projections and our planning area forecasts, ward level births are calculated using Office for National Statistics and Public Health Statistics. From September 2015, birth rates are generated from ONS estimates shared by ward based on Children's Health Information Service data. The housing trajectory considers properties with planning permission between 2023 and 2028 and uses the pupil forecasting formula of 0.1 primary age child per flat and 0.24 per house. And this projects the number of new pupils residing in an area, which is then divided over the 5-year trajectory and then across the 7 primary year groups. So our recommendations for primary, our analysis highlights a recommended reduction in PAN of 18.5 forms of entry across the whole city. That equates to 555 primary school places, and that will be 50% of the total surplus places in the whole city. Many of these proposals would be in areas where schools have, according to historical admission and number and roll data, been undersubscribed by half to 1 form of entry, and therefore will reflect parental preference and general reductions in demand. For secondary, in the academic year 24-25, we saw a demand for Year 7 secondary school places, which peaked at 4,635 applications. And for September 2025, this fell, and it is predicted that this will continue to fall. Previously, to meet this demand, some of our schools in Bristol have allowed offers above their published admissions number, and some have been taking bulge classes in Year 7 for several years now. So our recommendations for secondary are around ensuring there are sufficient Year 7 places in the city for every child who requires one, which Bristol will continue to do. We don't foresee that schools will continue to need to admit bulge classes, and therefore we are not recommending any reductions into the PAN in our secondary schools currently. However, this will be reviewed in our next strategy update, which will be September 2028, when the demand will have fallen, and we can give more details in that strategy. Post-16, so as of May this year, in Bristol, there are 905 young people who are at risk of not being in education, employment or training, otherwise known as NEET, and 605 young people who are NEET in Bristol. This has been influenced by factors including mental health challenges, inappropriate course selection, exclusions and suspensions, and a shift in preference towards direct employment. We've identified a sufficiency gap, particularly in relation to entry-level and level 1 courses. And our recommendations for post-16 are around early identification of individual needs and potential barriers to engagement, consideration of social and emotional factors, including the impact of reduced peer support, enhanced collaboration between schools, colleges and local authority, the provision of person-centred support plans that ensure continuity of care, and a review of post-16 sufficiency, particularly targeting entry-level and level 1 provision in areas of high need. And then finally, SEND. So in Bristol, we have over 13,000 children and young people living with SEND. There's been a significant increase in demand for SEND services, both at a national and local level. And as of last year, 70,635 children and young people are on roll in Bristol schools. 15.6% of those receive SEND support, and 4.1% of those have an education, health and care plan. The number of children and young people with an EHCP in Bristol increased by 18% between 2023 and 2024, and that's compared to a 11% increase nationally. Speech, language and communication needs is the most common type of SEND in Bristol, and that includes pupils who are awaiting an autism diagnosis. For pupils with an EHCP, autism spectrum condition is the most common identified primary need, followed by social, emotional and mental health needs. So nationally, the percentage of children and young people with an EHCP has continued to increase. There was a 10.2% increase between 2020 and 2024. And in Bristol, we have seen a similar pattern. However, between 24 and 25, the numbers have shown a spike, which reflects the removal of non-statutory top-up funding. We anticipate with mitigations that the number of EHCPs in Bristol will start to align with national averages over the next 5 years. So our recommendations and next steps for SEND are around providing the right support at the right time in the right place for all pupils with SEND, expanding local SEND provision to meet the growing demand and reduce reliance on out-of-area placements, promoting inclusivity by strengthening mainstream schools' capacity to support children with SEND, collaborating with families, schools and health services to co-produce decisions and strategies, and preparing our children and young people with SEND for successful transitions into adulthood. So our strategic approach to pupil-placed planning is a 6-part approach on the left. We are planning a strategic adaptive approach for reducing surplus capacity. That work is already underway and is going really well. We're implementing a collaborative area-based approach so that we can ensure that a decision at one school won't have adverse impacts on the other schools in the area. We're preserving parental preference as much as possible in this process and supporting our smaller primary schools by managing enrolment pressures effectively. We're also exploring future use for vacant school capacity to ensure that we keep, the space within the education estate and used for educational purposes. And we are preparing for a similar review of secondary school and post-16 provision, which will be detailed in our updated strategy in 2028. So on the right-hand side, the second part of the strategy is around our in-year admissions and teaching group structures and working patterns. So essentially, this part of the strategy talks about working with our schools and trusts to co-produce a new system where it's very transparent around the PAN for each year group. So not just reception and year 7, but for every year group in the school, so that the local authority can be aware of this at the start of the academic year. And then we can plan accordingly across all of our services when we're placing pupils into schools. And that's something that we will start co-producing with our schools. So the consultation for the strategy has recently concluded. That finished last week. And we are reviewing the feedback that we received. We asked our participants to what extent they agreed with the proposed recommendations for early years, primary, secondary, post-16 and SEND, as well as the strategic approach. And we asked them to give any general comments about the strategy or its recommendations. We have consulted with all schools and trusts, all councillors, MPs, governors, other local authorities, Bristol Parent and Carer Forum, early years and nursery settings, the private and independent schools, the diocese and members of the public. And in terms of our feedback, we've had around 20% strongly agree with our proposed strategic approach to people-placed planning. Around 36% agree, and then we've had around 9% strongly disagree. From our analysis, some of the key themes coming out of the comments are around inclusion and SEND pressures, funding and resource equity, the impact on workforce, parent choice and accessibility, and repurposing and estate strategy. So far in our conversations around reduction of published admission number for the academic year 27-28, we've had roughly 225 places agreed to be reduced. And we're also in conversation about a further 305 places. So if those further 305 places are agreed, and that is an ongoing discussion that we're having at the moment, then that will give us roughly just slightly short of our target of 555 places for reduction for the academic year 27-28. And just to give you an update about our timeline, so we are aiming to go to committee on the 27th of November for agreement for the strategy. And then after that, the strategy will be implemented. However, work has already begun in terms of the reduction in surplus places. Between October and January is the consultation timeline for schools to propose any amendments to their admission arrangements. Determination deadline is February the 28th. And then those admission arrangements do need to be published by March the 15th, 2026.
Okay. Jessica, thank you. That was, I'd say that was comprehensive and wide-ranging. So thank you very much for that. Let's invite any comments or questions, particularly with people wearing their schools forum hats. So Simon, then Louise, then Lee.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jessica. I've got two questions, if I can. I guess, first of all, obviously the consultation period for changing admissions, the window is just about to open. Do you have an indication of how many schools will be consulting to reduce their PAN at this stage? And I guess my second question is, obviously, you're as an admissions authority, your hands are slightly tied because you can only control a percentage of the schools, and obviously it's both trusts, the schools within trusts, and maintain schools that need to share the load. What is being done to kind of approach those trusts for them to do their fair share?
Yeah, I can definitely give you an indication of the number of schools so far that will be consulting to reduce PAN. What I'll do is in a second, I'll just double check the number and I'll put it in the chat if that's okay, because my document is closed at the moment. And in terms of that discussion with our trusts, our discussions are ongoing. We are looking at this strategically. We're working collaboratively. We've had really good feedback so far. We've had great participation from a lot of our trusts. So we are sort of taking a lead on this and asking our trusts where we think it is appropriate for them to reduce that PAN. Those conversations are ongoing, so we can't give you a definitive the number of schools just yet that will definitely be reducing PAN, because it's still very much part of a work in progress.
Okay. Thank you, Jessica. You better wave to me rather than put it in the chat when you've got an answer. But thank you for that. Right, Louise.
I just wanted to say thank you, because I think in the way that Jessica's described, Bristol City Council have really grasped the nettle on this, and I think you've been really proactive and have been working with schools and trusts really positively, and I think that's really welcomed by those of us engaging with you. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. I also just wanted to say that it's a really difficult scenario, the fall in pupil numbers. And if you put that alongside the financial pressures that schools are under, it's a really difficult situation that schools are facing. And if we want to ensure that schools can continue to offer a really high quality education, our best way of doing that is make sure that schools are structured in sustainable sizes without a lot of surplus places. So I really commend you for what you're doing. And I know you said that school closures are a last resort, and I absolutely get that. But sometimes, and depending on how far pupil numbers fall, we might have to be brave enough to say that the other schools will be able to offer a better quality education if they're financially sustainable, and closure might be an option in some rare cases. But I just wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate that feedback.
Well, thank you, Louise. Lee?
Thank you. That's really helpful. I've just got one question, one comment. The question is just about the SEND and EHCP numbers. So the SEND numbers at 15.6 and EHCP at 4.1, and your slide suggests that with mitigations, the number of EHCPs will start to align with national averages. I just wondered what do you mean by mitigations? What will that be? What will that entail?
So
it might not be for Jess. Sorry, probably
Yeah.
Vic.
Yeah, Jess, I can take that one. I think what we saw was, and I think we've shared this at forum before, but the withdrawal of and we've said this, through our planning that we published, the withdrawal of non-statutory top-up resulted in a very significant spike in requests for assessment, particularly because schools would have previously have sought funding from that top-up pot, but then with the withdrawal of that about 2 years ago, that meant that that pushed a number of requests into the statutory space. What we have done, and I suppose the mitigations are, what we have done is launched our inclusive learning service. We have launched a early intervention fund, and in fact there's some changes that are coming through this year to increase that fund per pupil and offer some support through that. We've also increased the capacity of our team. So we are still seeing quite a high number of requests for assessment, but they are coming down a little bit from where we were last year. So we are, in some ways, an outlier at Bristol in that, it was a unique bit of policy that was local to Bristol that caused that change. But over time, we expect us to, Bristol to return to the national average request for assessment. And then, look, the reforms are coming potentially this autumn. We're told, we haven't heard anything this week, for example, at the various conferences as to whether there's any indications, but that could, bring further change to the sector that may change it whatsoever. And I can't share any detail on that because we haven't been given any by government. But we are in a kind of policy reform space at the moment, and we'll see what that brings.
Thank you. That's helpful. And the comment is just on PAN adjustments for PFI schools. And just to keep in mind, I'm sure colleagues are aware that PFI PAN adjustments are more complicated. I know there's been some challenges with PAN adjustments for PFI in the past, but just a kind of reminder that Bristol do not have the ability to adjust PFI PAN numbers themselves. The PFIs are co-contracted with the DFE, so there's a lot of work consulting with the DFE and agreeing those changes before it could be suggested to any PFI schools were maintained or academies, primary or secondary. So just a comment there to kind of keep that into consideration as part of PAN adjustment plans for PFI only.
Thank you for that, Lee. And then Vic, back to you.
Yeah, I was just going to echo Louise's points. I know when I met with a number of head teachers when I took up post about 1.5 years ago, pupil-placed planning, particularly at primary schools, was one of the top 3 things that came up in every one of those conversations, and also came up here quite considerably. And we've done a significant amount of work on this, and it's been a really concerted strategy and action to respond. But we wanted to take a strategic approach, and obviously publishing that strategy was part of that, but also our close working with trusts and schools on how we implement that. So I just wanted to put on record my thanks to Sue Coombs and Jess Taylor, who've given tremendous leadership to this, have met with a number of schools, to talk through the implications, to make sure that they're reassured and supported through those changes. And it's been a really well run consultation and a really thorough document. So, and I should say, actually, one of the few nationally where we've been able to bring together our strategy around early years all the way through to SEND, mainstream schools and post-16 in one strategy. So yeah, just wanted to put on record my thanks, because the team have done a huge amount of work here, and it's really, really brilliant, and I think sector leading in the approach they're taking.
Thank you, Vic. I'll echo that. I'm going to go to Councillor Christine and then Joe W.
Thank you. So my question's in relation to what you've called the working PAN. Given that PAN applies to the year of entry, and then a working pan is not a thing. I'm just wondering what you mean by that and how you propose to keep to it, I suppose, given if there's a space and or if a parent appeals and they win, there is no such thing as a working pan. I think that's the point I'm making. So I'm kind of trying to understand what relevance that has and how it's being used.
Yeah, so we understand that we've sort of made, we've used the term working pan, but we've tried to clarify what it means by using that sort of teaching group structure language and that in-year number language. So, currently the local authority will contact our schools and we will ask them for their the pan that they're working to and their class group structure for all their other year groups that are non-bulk admission years. We need that information. A lot of our teams in the local authority need that information for placing pupils. Admissions need that information, for example. The ALP team need that information. But we are reliant on the schools responding to us and giving that information. So what we'd like to work towards is, an annual meeting with our schools where they tell us their class structure going forward into the new academic year, what their class structure is, so the numbers that they're working to. So, for example, where we're looking to place pupils through FAT panel, for example, we know that they are working to a class size of 30 for year 2, for example, and therefore we can see the number of surplus places that they have, and that just helps us to plan effectively and to place pupils effectively.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And finally, Jo.
Thank you. Just 2 really quick questions. I remember in a previous schools forum when we talked about school places, there was an excess of secondary school places in one area of the city, I think in the south, and a deficit in the north. Has that now evened out across the city?
Sorry, were you referring to our primary school, or secondary? Secondary. Yeah, so we do anticipate that it's likely that we will still require additional places in the north of the city. That has been a pattern, and I think it will take a little bit of time for that to ease as the reduced birth rates work their way through the secondary year groups. So that's why we're not recommending any reductions in PAN for secondary schools in this strategy, because we really do need to see how that reduced demand plays out. So yeah, I do anticipate that might still be something that happens, but again, hopefully it's not as severe as it has been in the previous years.
Great, thank you. And then my final question is about post-16. I know that you've recently changed your policy around transport for post-16 children with an EHCP. Has that had any impact on your numbers of children that are not in education, training or employment?
Yeah, I'm just thinking we may have to take that one away and check that. I think it may be too early to say at this point, Jo.
Great, thank you.
The change, I believe, only took effect in September, so
okay, fair enough. Yeah. Thanks.
Can I just comment on that?
Yes.
So every child that needed transport had it from day one, and I know that the homeschool transport are working. They've got a couple of cases that they're still working through. I know that there's been some media coverage nationally around children that clearly need door-to-door transport and parents having to pay huge amounts of money or being expected to transport their children. That isn't the approach that's been taken in Bristol. If a child needed door-to-door, it was the first point was this needs to be council provided and then work from there upwards rather than the other way around. So Hannah and I have been particularly in the special schools since September to sort of triangulate that off, and that's the case, yeah, but the figures will come through. Yeah.
Thank you. Jessica?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify from an earlier question that we have 12 schools so far looking to reduce PAN. And those conversations, as I said, are ongoing. So it is, that number will increase as our conversations continue.
Okay, thank you. Any more? Any further questions? No, thank you. That's been a good discussion and comprehensive paper. So thank you very much for that. The final thing I've got is the self-assessment update. At last meeting, we reported we'd had 17 responses and we were going to present the results of the self-assessment update at this meeting. For reasons I don't quite understand, I think some of those 17 were double counting, so we didn't actually have as good a response as we thought we were going to have. So I think a combination of Norman and Lauren are going to exhort to everybody to please respond so that we can present the results at the next forum. Is that right? Yep. Okay, so that's the plea, please. Next meeting, it will be in person, 5 p.m, 9th of December in City Hall, and we will be getting into the guts of the whole funding debate. And so it'll be really good to see you all in person and look forward to that. Any more from anybody today? I'm off to go and watch the football now. So there you go. All right then. Okay then. Cheers now. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Take care.
Bye everyone.